Welcome back to the Moms Like Me podcast powered by Support Now. I am thrilled to be able to have the amazing Abigail Johnston to the podcast today. Abigail is, in my opinion, kind of the living testimony of what it's like to be a fighter. And her story is quite incredible. She lives with stage 4 metastatic breast cancer that she discovered while she was breastfeeding one of her children. So, Abigail, my goal today is to learn more about your story. I think there's so much inspiration that others might find in fighting a cancer diagnosis, and to also teach people about what it's like to have to advocate for yourself and to also cherish the life that you have as it is and not necessarily as you wish it would be. So, Abigail, welcome.
Thank you. And thank you so much for having me. I do have to say that I was tandem breastfeeding, actually, breastfeeding both of my children when I was diagnosed.
Even more amazing. By the way, like that in and of itself is so impressive. Forget a crazy diagnosis. I mean, that is unbelievable. Thank you for calling that out.
Well, one of the things that we went through trying to get pregnant was we went through a lot of fertility treatments. And I think a lot of people, when one part of their body isn't working the way that it's supposed to, when another part of your body does, it's cause for celebration, right? So, I wasn't able to get pregnant without pharmaceutical assistance. And so then when I had an overabundance of milk, we were super excited and actually donated about 25,000 ounces of overproducing milk to other people while I was able to breastfeed. And somewhat ironic, foreshadowing, whatever you want to call it, some of the first milk that I donated went to someone who was diagnosed with breast cancer while she was pregnant, meaning that she gave birth and then was immediately wheeled down to the chemo suite to start getting chemo. And that person, who had twin girls, by the way, was the recipient of quite a bit of the milk that I was initially pumping and donating. So then when we found out that I actually had breast cancer as well, it was kind of a bookended moment, right? That we started with giving milk to someone with breast cancer, and then I ended up with breast cancer. So all kinds of interesting experience.
Wow. Let me ask the question, Abigail. How did you find out? I think people are always naturally curious. When did you know? When did you detect a problem? How did that all evolve?
As anybody who has breastfed knows, when you are breastfeeding, there are hands all over your breast, not just yours, but other people's as well. And so I found the lump, and it was in my left breast, and somewhat they call it 10 o'clock. So some in the inner side of my breast and somewhat close to the nipple. And so I was 38, so not at the point of being eligible for mammograms, hadn't had one at that point. And so I began looking for, who do I go to? And legitimately, there's no doctor really for your breasts while you're breastfeeding. Certainly the OBGYN is somewhat done with you, right? Like the baby's out, you're good, see you later. Then you've got your pediatrician, but the pediatrician doesn't treat the parent, treats the baby. And so it's your primary care physician, right? And so my initial primary care physician really had no frame of reference for this. And so I found a different primary care physician who also had a lactation certificate. So if you are breastfeeding, find a primary care physician that has that lactation extra training, because she knew what she was looking at. And she said, I'm 99% sure that nothing's wrong, but I'm sending you to get a mammogram anyway. And I want to make sure to say that is not the experience that many young women have. Women in their 30s will often be told you're too young for breast cancer. No one is too young for breast cancer. We know people in their teens, 16, 17 years old, who have been diagnosed with breast cancer. And in fact, those people under 40, that is the only segment of the population where breast cancer diagnoses are growing. In every other segment of the population, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, it's declining. But for those of us under 40, it's actually growing. And so it's so important, if you are under 40, premenopausal, that if you know there's something wrong, you know this is different, to make sure to advocate to get what I got, which was a diagnostic mammogram, not a screening mammogram. I got a diagnostic mammogram and a diagnostic ultrasound. And between those two tests, the radiologist at the location I went wanted to do a biopsy right away. Now, my primary care physician had told me to go elsewhere for that biopsy, and so I followed instructions. Got the diagnosis. Initially, they thought I was stage 2. So I had a lumpectomy, and I began chemotherapy. It was in the middle of chemotherapy that they tested my tumor markers. Tumor markers are just proteins that run around in your blood. Some, if they're elevated, can indicate the presence of cancer. And mine were pretty high, in the hundreds when they're supposed to be in the 20s, right? So got myself some more testing. And then we discovered in June of 2017 that I'd actually been stage 4 from the beginning, because every single bone in my body had multiple cancer lesions, from the tips of my toes to the top of my head.
So I think the natural follow-up question that so many people wonder is, did you ever feel anything? Did you ever have any sense that something was off? And obviously it's so hard because you're having babies. And so perhaps it's hard to distinguish between what is exhaustion and recovery from having children. And it sounds like also the drugs and the surgeries it requires to get pregnant. So what did you feel throughout, I guess, the years that this was living in your body?
So I had leg pain and back pain, but what pregnant person doesn't have leg pain and back pain, right? So even when we were in the rooms talking to the radiologist, talking to the radiation oncologist, talking to the medical oncologist, I never brought up that I had a pain in my back and I had pain in my leg, my right leg. And so it was surprising, but almost not surprising when we did the bone scan and realized there was actually much larger cancer lesions in my leg and in my back than there ever was in my breast. In fact, the lesion in my right femur was almost 5 centimeters, whereas the one in my breast got right over 2 centimeters. And so within a week of finding out that I was stage 4, and let me tell you the kind of the differences between an early stage and a metastatic diagnosis in what my doctor said. So when we thought I was stage 2, he said, this experience is going to be a chapter in your life. You're going to get through it and you're going to die of something else. That was literally what he said as I was getting diagnosed. When we found out on June 27th, 2017, that day will never leave my memory, he said, now this is going to kill you. And this is the diagnosis that will end your life. And in that appointment, he told me, statistically, I had 12 to 36 months to live. And that, yes, I might get a little bit more time because I had, at that point, bone-only mets. So when the metastases in my bones flare up, do things, I break a bone. As I'm sitting here today, I have 3 broken bones in my body. I had immediately, right after finding out I was stage 4, we got titanium rods put in both femurs because at least one of my femurs was quite literally about to shatter. And that's actually how a lot of people get diagnosed. They break a bone in a really significant way, and then they go hunting for why and realize that the cancer had weakened the bone. So how cancer interacts with different body parts, there's different things or different consequences. And for bones, it's that they become a lot weaker and it's a lot easier to break bones. I will literally have a significant sneeze and I break ribs.
Wow.
As they're so fragile anyway, and now so fragile from having had mets, and then all of the other medication that I'm taking. So it's just a lot of interesting consequences the longer I've lived with this, which it's been 8 years, not that 12 to 36 months that they were talking about at that initial appointment. But those kinds of statistics, that's what's being told to people. And that can really mess with your head and mess with how you live your life. Because everybody who's had a serious diagnosis, you have to figure out a way to have that not be your life. I tell people all the time, cancer is part of my life. My life is not cancer. And so I have to fit cancer treatment. I have to fit cancer into the larger pieces of my life, not the other way around. But that is a really hard thing to do as a patient.
Of course, it's natural. Like when you wake up every day knowing that this cancer is just living in your body with at stage 4 and fatal, like as your doctor said. Which I'd imagine there's some people that hear that think that it makes them cringe to hear a doctor say that. In other ways, the black and whiteness may actually help you make certain decisions and live a certain way, trying and instead of just trying to like gloss over it or kind of make it look like there's an outcome here that doesn't exist. So I am sure that you kind of balance between that. I'm really curious. I'm going to go back to something you said. Uh this shift that's happening in younger women in their 30s. I would imagine you have researched, and I know this to be true about you. You've become an expert and in this field. So from your perspective, I know you're not a doctor, but why do you feel that there is this rise amongst women in their, call it, 20s and 30s to have breast cancer?
So women are making very, very different decisions now, right? If we go back a couple of generations, you hit puberty and you were pretty much popping out babies right away, right? So it was not uncommon in generations past to see people as young as 15, 16, 17 starting to have babies. In my parents' generation, it was in their 20s, right? However, those of us, Gen X and later, women are delaying pregnancy for far longer than we ever used to. And that is a risk factor, the time at which you got pregnant. So that is one thing that is generally significant about younger women is that because we're doing all of our education first and then having children, there is then also a significant increase in people who are utilizing fertility medication, procedures, etc., to get pregnant. And even though doctors will swear that injecting yourself with estrogen, progesterone, etc., doesn't have a link to breast cancer, like breast cancer in my body was being fed by estrogen and progesterone. And so I don't think that we really can divorce that idea from I was injecting myself with the very hormones that make my cancer grow. So that, I think, from my perspective, is part of this where we're seeing younger women having breast cancer. And it's because the protective factors of pregnancy early on, of even when our periods begin, that number or that age is getting later. So the later you begin getting your period, that actually is also a predictive risk for breast cancer. We know that getting pregnant in the first year after, getting diagnosed with cancer in the first year after having a baby. So in that postpartum section, that is actually when the cancer is the most aggressive. And so for someone like me, diagnosed while breastfeeding, I fit that postpartum breast cancer category. And so there's actually a really cool study going on right now that is looking at giving ibuprofen in that first year postpartum, if that will affect by lowering inflammation, right? That might provide a protective factor for women in that first year, because if you're diagnosed postpartum, you typically have the least life expectancy. The cancer is the most aggressive, and it typically has more mutations. Very interesting, right? So we don't know all of these things, but there are a variety of things that protected women in previous generations that those of us living now and having babies now, our lifestyles are just not the same. So I think that's a pretty big part of it. We're also seeing more and more genetic mutations, and I think that's also part of the equation. I have a germline genetic predisposition for cancer that I did not know about until my diagnosis.
It is interesting. Like, I went to I did my annual recently, and my doctor, my OBGYN recommended, I'm under 40, and she said, I'm starting to, we're all hearing about this rise in breast cancer in women under the age of 40, and I would recommend that you just get a mammogram. And she's like, I have no reason to believe there's anything wrong, and it would make me feel better if all of my patients just are proactive around this. So I do think you got diagnosed in 2017. I would say, even from what I can see in the news and social media, word is quickly getting out around being more proactive if you are in your 30s, especially in your if you're trying to be a mom and all of that. There's no harm in getting this done and just seeing, because to your point, you catch it earlier, your outcomes can be much better. And they don't have to be as severe. It can be, as your doctor said, a chapter.
Yes.
I'd also like to go back to, it's amazing. I mean, they told you 12 months, and here we are in 2025. What do you attribute your longevity and your quality of life to? Like, what were the decisions you made to allow yourself to live and to watch your children grow, and while this cancer grows inside of you?
So primarily, I attribute that to being the most stubborn person alive. That when somebody says something, I am not predisposed to simply following what is being said. I Someone has said, and I will verify it from every which way I can verify it. No, I have caught 42 medical mistakes in my treatment since 2017. The very first one was I was already stage 4 and they didn't do a scan to verify my diagnosis. And so I honestly attribute the fact that I've been able to live far longer than any statistic I have been given is because never take no for an answer, that I ask every question that I need to ask. And I have sought out and consult with all the big brains, all the experts that I can find. And so that means when I need to make a decision, I make my rounds between the 5 medical oncologists that I have established care with, because I want everybody to be looking at whatever's going on from every different perspective. So the scary part of living this long with a serious diagnosis, and I'm just going to say this very specifically, MBC, metastatic breast cancer, is not a chronic disease. It is a terminal diagnosis. So while some people have gotten to the point of managing it as a chronic disease, meaning they have no side effects, they have no visible metastases, that sort of thing, that is a very, very, very small percentage of people. We're very happy for them. But that is not the majority. The majority is in treatment after treatment after treatment until we run out of treatments and then we die. That is the trajectory of this particular disease. But the people that I know who don't take no for an answer, who push for different ideas, who go like me to all the conferences and learn from the doctors directly to bring back to our local doctors, we've been the ones to be able to live longer. And I think that legitimately is because we're all so different. And our system is not set up to provide precision medicine. Yes, we're starting to get that way with different biomarkers and being able to target different things. But generally, our system is still set up with you follow the box, right? You follow the trajectory of the treatments because this is what you do at first line, second line, third line. The problem for somebody like me who's going in, right now I'm on my either 7th or 9th line of treatment, however you count them. There's no roadmap for somebody like me, but I've never followed the roadmap. So that's not so challenging for me. So I was trying things outside the box like triplet combinations, taking 3 different cancer drugs instead of 2. Now that's being studied in these gigantic clinical trials, and they're starting to see something I already did is actually very successful for patients. So that's really what I attribute it to. Certainly, there have been amazing healthcare workers along the way. There have been amazing doctors along the way. But I think at the end of the line, it's legitimately that I've made the decisions that have been best for me, best for my family, best for my quality of life. I've been in that driver's seat, and I think that has what has allowed me to live as long as I have.
Yeah, I mean, to label that, it's like you have been your best advocate, and you can't just rely on one medical professional to be the end all be all. It sounds like you've created almost like this board of advisors, this committee
Yep.
to assess it from each of their strengths and then to determine from there what feels right for you and your family, which I I wanna say, it sounds simple. I would imagine that is absolutely exhausting, and it requires a lot of coordination, and you have to really know how to communicate and to get feedback very quickly, because time it sounds like time is not necessarily on your side here, right? If we're calling it
Right,
what it
right.
is.
Yeah. No, that falls on me as the patient, right? To organize that, all of that. But it's what doctors do. So
Right.
they all have these things called tumor boards, right? So when they have a patient and they have a treatment plan, they go and have all the doctors from the different specialties weigh in. I just have my own special private tumor board. Since they won't let patients go to those tumor boards, I made my own.
I love it. I think it's incredible, and I think it speaks to why you've gotten, the attention that you have in terms of being a patient advocate and how you can support people in this MBC community. Like, there's a reason why those opportunities are coming to you because your stats speak for themselves. You
Yeah.
don't live it's not like you extended your life 6 months to a year. I mean, again, we're talking 17. It's like almost 8 years. That's incredible. That's
Yeah.
incredible. I am I wanna kinda, like, shift a bit, but does anything scare you at this point?
So legitimately, overall, my biggest fear is being in a situation where people are imposing something on me that isn't quite what I want or isn't quite right. So I do a lot of legwork to make sure that I understand so that I can make the best decision. But as a patient, we are bombarded with questions and decisions where we don't always have the information. And that happened at the very beginning, right? We had to make like, I don't know, 50 decisions about my care in a very short period of time with very little pieces of information. I have worked very hard over the last 8 years to never be put in that position again so that I understand the backstory. I understand the pros and cons. I talk to enough people to where I can make an informed decision. But at the beginning, all those informed consents that I was signing, and I use air quotes around that because I wasn't informed. I never had enough information. And I don't know that anybody does at the very beginning because it's jargon, everybody's going so fast. The people who are doing it don't like they've never come to it cold. So they don't know how overwhelming it is at the beginning. And so I vowed to myself that that was never going to happen again, right? I was going to be able to get educated enough and gather enough information to know that I'm making informed decisions. So that's kind of the big thing, right? And to me, I tell all of my care team, I am taking the responsibility of the decision. It's not your responsibility, it's my responsibility. So me, that takes pressure off of them. They don't always think that way, but it does.
Right.
And I think on the other end, if we're thinking about end of life, the thing that scares me is that it's going to happen in a way that is going to be very, very traumatic for my family. And so I know this is coming for me. I have made my peace with that to a certain extent. Planned as much as I can for the hospice piece of things. But, I'm talking to my palliative doctor. I'm talking to my team about, how we're organizing things or how we're doing things so that it's not so traumatic for my kids. Shortly after I was diagnosed, I went down this rabbit trail of finding as many people as I possibly could who had lost a parent to cancer. So I probably talked to over 100 people. And these were all ages, all races, all different cancers, all different countries, etc. And the one thing that every single person told me in one way or another was that they wished that their parent with cancer had told them more about the experience. Because pre-internet, right, they would make up in their heads what they thought things were. Post-internet, they would be Googling things and coming up with things that were not what was going on, but because they weren't ever given the explanation from the people, the parent who was having cancer, the blanks they filled in were far worse than the reality of the situation. And so I've really tried to take that to heart to make sure that not only do they know as much as I know on a developmental level, my boys were 1 and 3 when all this started. My eldest just turned 12 and my younger one's going to be 10 in May. So they don't remember me not having had cancer, but they also have known more along the way than probably other kids, mostly because I'm trying to learn from the people I've talked to, which was what they made up was far worse than the reality. So trying to give them that comfort and give them that information.
So you're actually leading me to my next question. How do you speak to the boys about cancer, about your cancer, and how typically do they respond?
So we started with the whole there's bad guys running around inside of mommy and the chemotherapy is killing the bad guys, right? I mean, that was a metaphor that resonated with them, right? They play lots of Minecraft and Roblox and all of that on the computer. So, thinking about this rogue cells and something coming to kill that rogue cell, that resonated with them. That fighting and battle analogy really breaks down for somebody who's terminal, because what happens at the end, we die, but we haven't lost a battle. We haven't lost the fight. And so we don't use that analogy just because it breaks down. And so, we do still talk about that there's bad cells in mommy's body, right? There are cells that are overproducing. We've gotten a little more granular with my older son, who's finally learned about cell division and biology and stuff. So, we talk about the cell got out of control, that the brakes came off and it's growing out of control. And that way we need medication to turn it off. So we talked about that. And so that, to a certain extent, my if I have a surgery, if I have treatment, that's no longer scary, right? Because that's what mommy does in order for the cancer to be kept under control. We don't typically use the word terminal just because I think that's a lot bigger, a little harder to explain. But we do talk about how good it is for me to get the medication, or how important it is for me to have that surgery, or why I'm going for radiation, because, we need a little more electricity to zap the tumor, that sort of thing. So we try hard to give them as much information as possible. The questions I get are clarifying questions typically. I think the last one, Liam asked me, because I used the word terminal in a conversation, and he's like, terminal, what does that mean? And I said, oh, that just means that it's going to kill me at some point, but not today. So from a coping mechanism, that helps me a lot, right? Like, instead of worrying about and catastrophizing about something that may happen a year from now, we try to come back to what can we do today to have a good time, to connect with one another, to maybe further, take a step further towards a treatment plan or something like that. But the focus being much more on right now, that has helped quite a bit.
As we wrap up, I mean, I could talk to you for hours. I think this is just so incredible. And I know you know this. Like, you talk about this all the time, and it's clear, and it's great that you do, because it's so much knowledge. Like, knowledge is power. And think about how much advice you've already given, particularly to young moms that may be quick to neglect symptoms or pain. Like, don't. But as we wrap up, my final question for you is, what are your dreams? What are your hopes? Like, what do you want to do? Like, what does like success look like for you?
It's a great question, because the very first thing I thought when they told me that this diagnosis was going to end my life was, I haven't had enough time with my kids. And at that point, they were 1 and 3, or they had just turned 2 and 4. So they were small. And so that core meant I closed my office. I had a law office at the time.
By the way, I can totally see how you were an incredible lawyer. Like, this skill set clearly translated to you advocating and I see that.
It was very much a lateral, like, take this and move over, which is not everyone's experience, right? I've been able to pivot, and I've been able to find a sense of purpose in that. So I think what we do with our time also is something that can be very rewarding and can redeem some of the struggle. And so, yes, overriding, I want to spend as much time with my kids. And so I prioritize taking them to school, picking them up from school, volunteering at their school. Those are things I prioritize, that I'm in their lives, and I'm in their lives in a very significant way. And then finding purpose and finding meaning with the time that I have, because I was a workaholic. I worked far few hours now, but I'm able to take from my training, from that experience, and shift that into this space. And so I do a lot of legal clinics helping people get disability, unraveling insurance things, estate planning, all of those things where legal issues touch a cancer patient's life. That is something that is not complicated for me. I'm able to give people direction, strategize. Not able to represent people in the same way anymore. I officially retired, so I'm not paying any more dues to the Florida bar. So I can't go in front of a judge anymore right now, but I can practice with people and guide them in how they can navigate some of these very complicated things. And that, again, it gives me that sense of purpose. It gives me a sense of giving back to the community in a meaningful way. And then I run a mentorship program where I'm connecting people one-on-one to walk this path and walk this experience together. Because as much as professional help helps, and it absolutely does, and I tell everybody not to ignore that, there's almost nothing more powerful than to be able to talk to somebody who's walking this same path that you are, who can say, oh yeah, me too. So you don't feel weird and you don't feel like you're the only person struggling in the dark with this side effect or this worry. It's something that other people do as well. So that sense of connection and that sense of not being alone, that is something that I don't want for anybody living with a serious diagnosis. And so that's why we work to make sure they're not alone.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's beautiful to hear you talk in terms of, again, it's like the simplicity of things. It's like, what do you want to do? Like, you want to spend time with your kids? You want to feel fulfilled through, the work and the skills and the education that you worked for so long. I think sometimes when people hear cancer, people think of like, okay, well, I'm just going to jet off and see the world and travel and there's no, I'm not criticizing
that. Yep, nothing wrong with that.
And sometimes like the beauty in life is just the everyday. It's the ordinary. It's the simplicity of being able to wake up and have fulfillment across your family and across your profession. And it sounds like that's all you need.
Yeah. My therapist shared with me the other day that in order to be a whole human being, you need somebody to love, something to look forward to, and something to do that's meaningful. And to me, that's really what we've embodied.
I love it. What a beautiful way to wrap up. Abigail, where can people find you? I know that there will be many people that are thinking to themselves, I know someone that must find out more about Abigail. Where would you recommend they go to look for you?
So I have a blog called No Half Measures. Has nothing to do with Breaking Bad, just as I never do anything halfway. So that is there and has links to a variety of organizations. But I would highlight Project Life, and that can be found at www.projectlifembc for metastatic And we are a free wellness community for the people living with metastatic breast cancer. And since all of us on the leadership team are also living with the same disease, we are able to adjust to other people living with our same diagnosis in a very different way. Many organizations decide what MBC patients need. We think that should be something our community should be deciding. And so that's what we do at Project Life.
Well, Abigail, thank you so much for joining us today. I am so grateful to hear more of your story. And as always, praying for you and just, enjoying every moment, day, and just taking it all in stride the way you are. It really is. It's inspiring. I know it sounds cheesy, but it's true. Thank you so much. And I look forward to future conversations with you.
Thank you. Me too.